Hey everybody, welcome to WTF Hammer Soulbound. So if you're new to the game, you might find it a bit challenging to read through the lofty rulebook, to not only understand all the rules, understand how all the skills, talents, spells, all those things work, but also just understand the more basic things like character creation. So along with those other things, which I will be discussing in more detail in future videos, I'll be focusing this video specifically on character creation, how to build a character from scratch, designed specifically for new players who are trying to get a hang of the game. And there are a few steps outlined in the core rulebook that I'm going to go through broadly and then more specifically. First of the steps being to choose your archetype, which is kind of broken into two sections really. Selecting your species and then an archetype. Maybe you want to choose an archetype and then have that determine your species, or maybe you want to choose a species and have that narrow down your focus in terms of what archetype you want to choose. Once it's like this, you're going to have to develop an understanding of what the attributes are: body, mind, and soul. See what skills and talents are available to you depending on that archetype. Understanding skills with regard to what training means, how it works in terms of game mechanics, as well as focus, and also understanding what talents are, how some talents have requirements, and how a special type of talent is called a miracle, which is specifically reserved to priest-type characters who worship a specific god. Not to mention writing out your equipment, understanding how that equipment works. There's weapons, there's armor, there's other equipment, there's special Kara-drawn equipment for that archetype, Fire Slayer runes for their archetype, general goods and services, tools and kits as well. And then there are other details you have to keep in mind when building a character as well. So kind of obvious things like name, more distinguishing things like the physical appearance of your character, age, distinguishing features, eyes, hair, height, and very importantly, the goals of your character, both short-term and long-term, which is the method through Soulbound by which you get experience and actually level up your character. And Soulbound's also interesting where it puts a special emphasis on your party. It's not just the individual, but the party as well, who collectively have goals, both short-term and long-term, who have connections, so, official ways that your characters are affiliated with each other, as well as the mechanics of Soulfire and Doom, which I'll be getting into. And then finally, just bringing your character to life, answering 10 questions, helping you to get a sense as to how you should role play your character. So character creation obviously is a fairly involved process. I'm going to try to make it as simple for you as possible through this video by also modeling an example while going through the steps one at a time. And once we've gone through all these steps, we can work on finishing touches just to make all the final calculations like your melee, your accuracy, your defense, armor, toughness, wounds, initiative, natural awareness, and metal, which I'll generally describe here, but we'll describe in more detail in future videos. And final thing, which I'm just going to allude to here, but which I'll describe once again in more detail in future videos, is the idea of advancement, which is that whole leveling up mechanism that I described, how you can build up your attributes, your skills, your talents, and what the XP costs are for each of these. So let's start with the first step, which is choosing your archetype. And this is really divided into a series of species. So there are 5 main species in Warhammer Age of Sigmar Soulbound. There are humans, so no surprise there, who have access to the archetype of free peoples only. Actually, humans are the most limited in terms of their options, at least in the earlier iterations of this game. So you basically have human battle mages, Excelsior, war priests, or trade pioneers. You can also choose Stormcast Eternals, which are sort of celestial humans, who could also be free peoples, trade pioneers, because I haven't seen any rule to imply that that's not possible. But they also can be Stormcast Eternal archetype, getting access to some very interesting and powerful character classes like the Knight Azyros, the Knight Incantor, the Knight Questor, and the Knight Venator. You can choose an elf, which is basically just an elf, who have many options available. So free peoples, they can be trade pioneers, black art corsairs, or darkling sorceresses. They can also be a part of the Daughters of Cain archetype, becoming either hag priestesses or witch elves, or have access to another variant called the Ideneth Deepkin, being able to play as Achelian emissaries, Ishtar and Soul Scryers, Ishtar and Tidecasters. And I'll be going over these specific archetypes and what they do generally in another video. Anyway, that's not all. There's also Duardin, which are basically dwarves who can be trade pioneers as well, because trade pioneers are accessible to all species. And they can also be fire slayers, having access to the Auric Rune Smiter, Battlesmith, and Doomseeker archetypes. They can be Kara-drawn Overlords, having access to Aether Chemists, Endrin Masters, and Skyriggers. And that does it for the dwarves. And finally, there's the Sylvaneth, who are tree people, who can also be trade pioneers, and also have access to their own archetype, in which they can be a Branch Witch, a Kurnoth Hunter, or a Tree Revenant Waypiper. So lots of details here. I don't expect you to absorb all of this, but what I will do is choose one for myself and build my own character to give you guys a sense as to how you build your own characters. So I'll be choosing the Duarden Fireslayer Auric Rune Smiter, and I'm going to be building a character based off of this archetype just to make a demonstration for you. So here's the generic fillable Soulbound character sheet that you can get once you buy the core rulebook. It comes with this as an accessory, so I'm scrolling up and down through it a little bit. But so far, just for my initial decision, I know that my archetype is going to be Auric Rune Smiter. And species will be Duarden. And that's as much as I've decided so far. So next step will be writing down the attributes of this archetype. So the way that works is that you basically select the starting attributes of the selected archetype, which will be written in the rule book, and then you could choose to swap 2 values if you want to shift around your body, mind, and soul in some way. And this is the Duarden Auric Rune Smiter's basic profile here. So they have body 3, mind 2, soul 3. If I wanted to, I could switch mind to 3 and make soul 2, or I can switch body to 2 and make mind 3. So just one swap is available. I'm personally not going to swap. I'm going to stick with this 3-2-3 layout because it fits better with this archetype skills and talents. So I'm just going to go ahead and write that in the character sheet now. So right here in body, I'm going to put 3. Mind, I'm going to put 2. Soul, I'm going to put 3. It doesn't fit so smoothly in the fillable sheet, but it's still functional. So next step are the skills. So general rule is that you start with training 1 and focus 1 in a core skill, in the core skill of your archetype. And then you can spend XP to gain training and or focus in new skills or further improve your core skill if you want to. So if we go back to the framework of the Auric Rune Smiter and look at the skills, we can see that the core skill is devotion, which means my character is going to have training 1 and focus 1 in devotion. And then I could also spend 7 XP on skills in general. So I can either increase my devotion, training, or focus by spending the necessary XP as you saw in that advancement profile earlier in this video. Or I can just take some new skills like ballistic skills to make him rangy, beast handling so that he can handle animals, crafting so he could build stuff, determination, which is kind of like a willpower thing, devotion, which is commitment to gods, fortitude, which is toughness, intuition, which is noticing things or sensing stuff, might, which is strength related things, theology, which is understanding things pertaining to gods, or weapon skill, which is the melee attack. So this character is kind of a priest, a very crafty priest. So they craft runes, but they can also use miracles because they're blessed by Grimnir, so they'll have access to that list of miracles. So I'll be focusing my skill points on weapon skill and crafting, and if I have a bit left over, maybe I'll increase devotion, but it's expensive to do it, so let me just take a look at what I could spend my 7 XP on. So if we look back at the advancement profile here, and I look at the skills, it just costs 1 XP to get training 1 in a skill. So to choose a new skill like weapon skill or craft, it'll just cost me 1 XP for each of those. If I want to put focus in them, that would cost me another XP. If I want to increase devotion, which I already have training 1 and focus 1, and it would cost me 2 for each bonus. So it would cost me 4 effectively if I wanted to put an extra training and an extra focus in that, which is pretty expensive. Going to training 3 is basically out of the question based on the amount of XP that I have. So what I'll do to spend my 7 XP is spend 2 on devotion, just to increase my training in it, 1 in weapon skill and get a focus in that as well. So that'll bring me to 4. I'll do the same thing in craft, which leaves me 1 left, which I'll put into the fortitude just to make this guy tough. So starting off with my core skill, I put training in devotion and focus in devotion as well. I'm going to spend 2 XP to increase devotion by 1 more training level. I'll put 1 training in weapon skill and 1 focus in weapon skill. So I spent 4 experience total at this point. I'll put 1 in training for craft and 1 in focus for craft and 1 in fortitude, which brings me up to a total of 7 XP spent on skills. So now I can move on to talents. So similar to skills, first thing, I'm going to acquire my core talent for free. Then I'm going to choose additional talents from the archetypes shortlist. So if you look at the Auric Rune Smiter, under talents, my core talents are 3 actually. I have Blessed by Grimnir, which means I have access to miracles, Sense Urgold, which means these guys can sense Urgold, and Zargrim, which allows them to make Urgold runes, which I'll talk about the process in another video. And as far as talents that they have access to, they can become diplomats, have fearless, get guts, or choose any miracles of Grimnir. Anything that has a star has some kind of a requirement. In the case of guts, it requires that you have training in fortitude, which I do have, and I would actually like to choose guts as one of my talents. It gives me an increase in my toughness, so I'm going to choose guts. And then I could choose a miracle or diplomat or fearless. I'm going to choose a miracle because this guy is a priest and I'd like to have access to it. So I'm going to choose the miracle Searing Heat. So going back to my character sheet, scrolling down a little bit to where I have talents, I'm just going to type in what I have. So I get Blessed Grimnir, Sense Urgold, Zargrim for my core talents. And then I also chose Guts and Searing Heat. And I'm just going to write Miracle in brackets here so that I know where to find the rules in case I forget how it works. So already a good way through the character building process. Let's move on to the next step, which is the equipment, which is actually pretty straightforward. Obviously, learning how the equipment works is a different question entirely, but just simply getting the equipment from the archetype is definitely not a complex process at all. You just obtain the starting equipment. So if you look at the Auric Rune Smiter in the equipment section, I can choose any 3 Urgold runes. I'd obviously have to go to page 117 and choose from the list. I get a Runic Iron and Hand Axe or Latch Axe, which is a Great Axe. A Forge Key, which is a holy symbol, and enough Urgold to forge 1 Urgold rune, and 15 drops of Aqua Gyranus, which is basically currency in this game. So I'll just write this on my character sheet, go to the equipment section and choose the more specific items that I want, and then I can move on to the next step. So if I go back to my character sheet and just scroll down to find the equipment, I can write down the details. So I'm going to be choosing 3 runes here. Since I've been focusing on toughness a lot, I am going to choose 2 runes based on toughness. So first will be Rune of Fiery Determination, which gives me an extra space on the wound track. Also get Rune of Iron, which gives me +1 armor. And Rune of Searing Heat because it allows me to do more damage. I'll get the Latch Axe, which is basically the great weapon, which will take up both my hand slots. I'll just write it in both. Latch Axe. Latch Axe. I'll write the Forge Key, which is a holy symbol. I'll write my 15 drops over here of Aqua Gyranus, and I also have enough Urgold to make 1 rune, so I'll just put Urgold 1 rune just to keep it simple. And that basically does it for the fundamentals of the game mechanics for the character. I'm going to go on to the more specific details. So adding detail. So this game gives you the option to either choose or roll your physical characteristics following page 28 to 32 of the rulebook. So I'm just going to take you there now so that you can see what I'm talking about. So you can read through this section if you want to. It gives you some name suggestions depending on the species that you choose. So there's humans, elves, Stormcast Eternals, Dwarden. I'm a Dwarden, obviously, so I can choose one from this list. But I want to come up with my own name, so I'm going to actually name my dwarf Grimly. And then as far as physical appearance goes, you can choose the age or roll for the age. Add distinguishing features, eyes, hair, height. I'm just going to choose them kind of arbitrarily. So age range is between 30 to 120 as starting age. I'll just make them 55 because dwarves are a little bit older than humans, or at least they live longer. So you can choose some distinguishing features, which are cool, rolling 2d6 and basically crossing them across this table. I don't have any dice with me right now, so I'll just say he has a piercing on his neck because that seems pretty badass. For eye type, I'm going to make him bitter. For eye color, I'll make them gold because of Urgold. And for hair color, I'll make it red because he's a fiery fire slayer. You can also roll for height, and Dwardens are pretty short. I'm going to make him 4'5". There's nowhere to roll the weight, so you just have to kind of decide on a weight that you think is appropriate. Dwardens are pretty heavy, even though they're short, so I'm going to make them about 210 pounds. And as you can see, I put all of it into this character sheet. Only option that wasn't available is eye type. And I mean, these character sheets aren't really perfect, but they're free and they're easy to use. So you could obviously write this out on a piece of paper too if you wanted to add more detail that was not available on this page. Next, you need to decide on the short-term and long-term goals, which is really what determines how you get XP. So you don't get XP for killing enemies in this game like you do in most role-playing games. You gain XP for completing personal short-term and long-term goals, as well as party short-term and long-term goals. So these are things you have to figure out with your GM depending on the background of your character. Maybe your GM will just give you outright suggestions as to what your goals could be. Or if you have a good sense as to how to play the game and what the lore is like, you can choose your own short-term goals. I'm going to choose a couple here and write them on my character sheet. But the general rule is that as you accomplish goals, you can either gain XP for completing those goals. I think it's 1 for short-term, 3 for long-term. Or you can retire your character because they will have accomplished their soul-bound quest in some manner. For goals, I'm just going to say short term would be to craft 3 runes because he's a runesmith. Obviously, the GM would have to be okay with that as a short term goal. So I'll just put ST here so there's no confusion. And long term goal maybe could be to learn 3 miracles because that's something that's difficult to do, but it would be something that would please this character's god and could be a long-term goal for them. And yeah, obviously dependent on GM's approval. Next, we look into the party. So this is a more collective thing that you obviously can't do on your own. Must be worked out with the GM and with the party as a whole. Really fits in more with the role-playing scheme and the whole campaign itself. So you need to work with the GM to establish relationships to the members of the party. So we see role connections following page 36. And there's actually a completely separate party sheet, which you and the other members of the party obviously share, where you can come up with a party name. So it could be like, I don't know, the Justice League or some kind of squad name that you think is actually appropriate. You write the name of the members of this. So I'll put Grimly here. I haven't made other characters yet, so I'm not going to be including them in as of yet, but in other videos, I'll add them more as I go into more detail. You have a soul fire pool, which is based on the number of soulbound characters, which basically includes every single member of your party who is not a Stormcast Eternal. So let's just say 3. Let's say it's a party of 4. One's a Stormcast Eternal. 3 are not, so therefore you have 3 total soul fire. Short-term goals of the party, you'd have to figure out. Long-term goals, you'd write them down here as well. And obviously accomplishing these goals through role play and through playing through the game mechanics is how you gain XP. You can also write in other details like who the allies of your party is, enemies, and this is really role play centered, and what kind of resources your party has as well. You can write down things like rumors so that you don't forget what you learned between session, fears, threats, all cool things to help build a dynamic with your team. And finally, there's the Doom track down here, which starts at 1 and increases based on a series of rules, which I will also be discussing in a different video. And obviously, the higher it gets, the worse things get in terms of your encounters and for the world around you. So I already talked about the party versus binding. So party is every member of your party, and binding are those involved in the soul bound. So everybody who's not a Stormcast Eternal. And for the long-term goals, obviously you work with the GM to choose short-term and long-term goals. Completing these things gives you XP, also recovers soul fire, which is a very limited and powerful resource, and or it gives you the option to retire if you've satisfied your goals and you want to just start with new characters or in a new party entirely. Soul fire equals the number of members in your party, and Doom always starts at 1, and this is how you'll start things off. And since we're in the whole character creation process, we don't really need to go into much more detail beyond this. And finally, bringing your character to life. This game has good questions just to kind of help you think about who your character is, reflect about what the goals and interests of this character might be. Obviously, they can be built off of the goals that you chose, or maybe you can even do these questions first to help you decide what your goals might be, short-term and long-term. And just stuff like, where are you from? What's your family like? What was your childhood like? Why and when did you leave home? Who is your greatest ally or best friend? Who is your enemy or bitter rival? What is a secret that no one else knows? What's your worst fear? What do you desire the most? And why are you doing this? So all good questions to help you determine what the motivation of your character is. And this brings me to the finishing touches. This is just where you calculate all the mechanical details that you're going to need to know on your character sheet, because there are lots of roles and lots of tests in this game. You have to determine your melee, which is how effective you are in melee combat, your accuracy, which is how effective you are in range combat, and your defense, which is how well you could defend yourself against melee attackers and ranged attackers. And you can calculate these as follows. For melee, you just add your body to your level of training and weapon skill. So in the case of my character, it's going to be 3 for body plus 1, because I had put 1 training and weapon skill. So he's going to have a melee of 4, which I'll compare to the latter, which makes him average in melee combat. For accuracy, I do mind plus level of training in ballistic skills. Unfortunately, this character only has 2 mind and no training in ballistics, so he has an accuracy of 2, which makes him poor in ranged attack warfare. And defense, you add the body to the level of training in reflex skill. So body is 3, no training in reflex. And this is modifiable by equipment, but I've not chosen any equipment that would modify my defense. So on my character sheet, melee, average, range, poor, defense average, which covers my initial combat abilities. But there are other finishing touches that I need to consider as well, such as my armor, which is determined by armor, spells, and talents. And this basically provides damage reduction, and certain weapons can break armor, which is a detail to be aware of, although it doesn't affect the character creation. So my character is not wearing any armor, but he does have a rune that gives him 1 armor when it's activated, so it's something that I would keep in mind in a combat situation. He otherwise doesn't have any spells or talents to improve the armor. Toughness basically means your hit point, so how much you can take as a beating before you start to suffer wounds. It's body plus mind plus soul, which in the case of my character is 3 plus 2 plus 3. So obviously for my character it's 8, so as you can read here, once he gets to 0 toughness, he would start sustaining wounds. And wounds result in serious injuries. And your max wounds before you become mortally wounded, which is the point where you're at risk of dying, is basically your body and mind and soul divided by 2, rounded up. So in my case, it would be 8 divided by 2, which is 4. But as a dwarven, he also gets an extra 2 wounds on the wound track. So he has 6 wounds, making him particularly hardy. So going back to my character sheet here, toughness is 8. Armor is 0, but could become 1 if I use that rune. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, plus another 2 for being a dwarven on my wound track. And for finishing touches, we have 3 more things to calculate. We have initiative, which is mind plus level of training and awareness skill plus level of training and reflex skill. So my character has terrible initiative with only 2 mind, so initiative is only 2. Natural awareness, which is this character's ability to notice things passively, which is mind plus level of training and awareness skill divided by 2. So in my case, it's only 1. And metal, which is a finite resource that is used to fuel a number of talents and is used during combat to take extra actions. It's soul divided by 2, rounded up. So with my 3 soul, that gives me 2 metal. So initiative 2, metal 2, and scroll up to natural awareness is only 1. It's pretty bad. I could also write down the details of my attack. So since I do have that latch axe, I could check the equipment section to find out what my damage and stuff is, and I could write it here as well. And actually notice there's just a spells and miracles section down here, so I can actually write my searing heat miracle down here, as well as all the details as to how it works, the DN cost, target, all that kind of stuff. So sorry for that oversight. And that basically does it. Besides a couple minor things like filling in my latch axe attacks information and my spell and miracle information, I'm basically done and I'm good to play. Need to figure out some long-term goals and short-term goals for the party, and then you're basically just good to go. So obviously there's a lot more involved in this game than just character creation, and I plan to make a number of videos covering the rules, skills, talents, eventually maybe making my way to strategies as to how to build good characters, but I'll get there eventually. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content, and I hope you have a nice day.